known him as Jesus Bar Joseph, right? Because I'm saying Jesus, the son of Joseph, and you see it in the Bible several times as well. Like we know you, we know your dad. You're the son of Joseph. Okay, Jesus the Christ is something which we which came along towards the end of his ministry and immediately afterwards. So Jesus was a fairly common name. I'm not sure how many of you know this. Jesus was a fairly common name. In fact, the name isn't even Jesus. I'm not even going to go into that. Yes, you are. I won't go into that. But it is not the Jesus bit that really made the difference. We don't call people Jesus anymore because we have so much respect for the name. Unless, of course, you're Mexican or Spanish, and then in which case there's plenty of Jesuses. I mean, I used to, just by the by, I used to work with a guy in Spain. His name was Jesus, and every time I had to write a request to him, I would write Dear Jesus, I need your help. Can you please? And I'd pause every time I wrote it because I always felt like I was I was writing a prayer. Because Dear Jesus, it actually just looks on the screen, Dear Jesus, right? So it does some people still use the name, but the vast majority of people do not use the name Jesus. But you will never find anybody, ever find anybody called Christ. Why is that? Well, Christ, we know. So the Messiah is what we see throughout the Hebrew scriptures. The Messiah throughout the Hebrew scriptures is so when you hear people talk about the Messiah, this is the person who's been showing up throughout the scriptures. However, when the scriptures are translated to Greek, the word Messiah becomes Christos. And so Christos being the Greek translation of the Messiah, as time went on and English became the dominant language, it simply got translated from Christos to Christ. But it's actually Jesus the Messiah or Jesus the Christ, which we just shortened to Jesus Christ. Okay, so who was this Messiah supposed to be? Well, the Old Testament refers to an individual who goes by many names, many names. And it did not take long for the ancient scholars to thread together the fact that all of these people were the same person. This shadowy figure who pops up, sometimes in person, but many, many times just in this literature. It's like every so often, windows are opened and you get a glimpse of him, and then the doors are closed again or the windows are closed again. And he's constantly appearing throughout the Old Testament. And it did not take them very long to realize that they are the same person. He's known by many names. He's known by the Son of David. He's known as the Son of God. He is known as the Son of Man. I put Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 to 14 there. I would highly recommend that you go and look at it. We will deal with that later on. And he's also known as my servant. You see this pop up many, many times. But the Son of David, Son of God, Son of Man, you see them come up many times. So, shall we play a game? How many of you have played the game Connect Dots? I think you would have all done it as a child. It's a game I used to thoroughly enjoy. You take a pencil, you've got a whole bunch of different dots all over the screen, and each dot has a number, and you join the dots together. You join the numbers together, you join the dots, and as you do this, a picture begins to emerge. A picture begins to present itself as you are joining all of these dots. So let's imagine for a second that you just zoomed in on one of these, and each of these dots was like a different part of the Bible, right? You've got Genesis, you've chapter 3, verse 15, you've got Genesis 49, 10, you've got Numbers, you've got a whole bunch of other ones just popping up all over the place. And as you do this, you begin to join these dots together. And as you join the dots together, slowly this picture begins to emerge. And eventually you begin to see exactly what the picture is supposed to be. That is what happens in the Bible. Now, I want to deal with something very quickly. Some people may say, and I've heard it said many times by people who don't want to believe the Bible, and I say they don't want to believe the Bible because you need to have a real desire not to believe it for you to read it and not accept the fact that there is something divinely inspired within these words. So it's something which I heard from somebody else. I'm not going to claim it as my own, but if I hear something that's useful for teaching, I will absolutely take it. They say imitation is the highest form of flattery. So there you go. Whoever it was who said this and told me, well done, thank you. A lot of you may have read The Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was a book that was written by J.R.R. Tolkien. And if you haven't read the books, you've almost certainly seen or heard of the movie Lord of the Rings. And Lord of the Rings was written around the time of World War II. And a lot of people began to draw parallels between World War II, the events that were taking place, and Lord of the Rings. And J.R.R. Tolkien had to deal with this, and he wrote a foreword, which he basically said, look, everybody, you may read this book and see parallels, right? There's a part in the Bible where, like, sorry, Bible, in the book, Lord of the Rings, where everything's going terribly, the wars are going horribly wrong, the bad guys are winning, and out of nowhere comes Rohan. Rohan kind of marches along, they bolster up the army, they manage to take out all of the bad guys, and it gets wild, right? And a lot of people were saying, like, that was Europe. Europe was fallen, and it was destroyed, and the Nazis were at the gates, and they were looking across the channel. They were already in Paris or looking across the channel at the United Kingdom. And then along comes America, and America is like Rohan, and they happen to destroy all. And you can draw so many parallels between them. But the thing is, if you're drawing parallels between World War II and Lord of the Rings, even though there's a lot of coincidental parallels in there, the author of the book has already told you, I didn't write this for parallels. It's just coincidence, right? What the author effectively also says, which is quite funny, is all I was trying to do was write the longest book possible. So like that's all he was trying to do. So if you go through Lord of the Rings and you're finding these parallels, you say he was saying this, he was saying that, you'd be completely wrong. But then let's look at another author, shall we? His name is C.S. Lewis. Well, his name was C.S. Lewis, one of the greatest writers that the you know literature produced, and he was a Christian. So of course I say one of the greatest. But he was one of the greatest, whether you're Christian or not, because he wrote a book that you will all be familiar with, which were the Aslan series, right? The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Narnia books. And those books, C.S. Lewis absolutely said from the beginning that I'm writing this as parallels of the Bible. And he gives you complete permission to go through it and see parallels in his work and the Word of God. So when you look at it, you can absolutely see the way sin rears its ugly head and it tempts people. You can see Aslan, the lion, as the lion of the tribe of Judah. And as if you once you know that this, once you know that this is what he was trying to do. When you read through Narnia, you absolutely see the threads and the connections as Aslan the lion, this majestic creature lays down on the rock and has his hair cut and he's tortured and then eventually he's killed and then he rises again. You begin to see that it is Christ that he's writing about. So if you were to draw parallels between Christ and the Bible and Narnia, absolutely you can do that because he's giving you permission to. In the same way, the passages we just read in the Bible is God absolutely giving us permissions to play this game of connect the dots. It is God telling us to go through the Old Testament and look through it. So some people say, "Oh, you're just making things up and finding it." No, we're not making things up. We're not just finding things where we want to see them. We are absolutely, with the permission of God Himself, going through the Old Testament and finding these parallels. And we're like, that's who He is. That's where He is. So we're going to play this game of connect the dots now, and we're going to start everything off in the book of Genesis. Those of you who know me will know that I constantly talk about Genesis being the seed. Genesis is the acorn, right? You look at an acorn, you don't see anything special. It's just a small, right, seed. But you plant that thing and you let it grow, and it becomes a mighty oak tree. But that mighty oak tree that feeds all the birds and it nourishes the ground and it's unmovable and storms can come and level homes and that oak tree will still stand. That oak tree, every ingredient for it was already in that acorn. So Genesis is that acorn for the Bible. Everything you see in the Bible begins in Genesis, not just arbitrarily like a starting point. No. It is the seed from which everything else germinates and grows. So let's go into the book of Genesis and see what the book of Genesis actually has to say about our Christ. And some of you may have expected me to begin with, in the beginning, God said. And I'm not going to start with that because I think everybody knows that. It's something which God, in the beginning, when God created the world, God there is referred to as Elohim, which is plural, which means that there was more than one. And when God said, "Let us make man in our own image," he was speaking to other persons of the Godhead. All right. So that's something which I think we all know. But we're looking specifically here at the Messiah. So with the Messiah, we know what's happened to begin with, right? We've had the fall of man. He's eat their lips are dripping with the fruit, and the fruit is not an apple. I don't know why everyone thinks it's an apple. I guess it's because all the pictures drawn of Eve and Adam eating the apple is an apple. But we don't know what fruit it was. Whatever, right? So they're eating this fruit and it's dripping off their lips. And I don't know about Jesus. We'll come to that later. God comes walking through the Garden of Eden and he sees what they have done and he speaks to them, and along come those curses that he lays upon man. But then he lays this curse as well. And along the curses, there's hope. Hope is thrown into this picture. And it says, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Notice the H there, and notice the S for seed. Enmity between your seed, that being the seed of the serpent, and her seed, that being the seed of Eve. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, just looking at it arbitrarily, forget poisons and things like that. If someone bruises your head or you bruise someone's heel, who's hurt who the most? I would suggest the person whose head was hurt had been bruised the most. But what we see here is there shall be a destruction or a massive blow dealt to the serpent. But we also see that it will not be painless. There will be something that comes out of that serpent that will strike at that seed. And the seed, notice it wasn't seeds, it's not plural, it is singular. It is your seed and her seed being capitalized. The reason they capitalize that S, if you remember when we dealt with some of this earlier on, is that they are effectively personifying it. This seed is not just another human being. It is a significant human being. And we know it's a human being because it will come from the woman. So at this point, what do we know as we play our game of connect the dots? We know that there will be a man, because it's referred to as "he shall bruise your head." This man will be born of a woman. So at this point, it could be 50% of the planet. Actually, slightly less men than women. So whatever. Anyway, that's roughly 50% of the planet at this point could potentially be this seed. So we need to narrow it down a little bit more. And in narrowing it down, we come on to our Abraham. So Genesis chapter 22, verse 15. "Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, blessing, I will bless you, and multiplying, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies. In your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." Okay, so now we have gone from, we know it's a man, we know that we know that this man will be born of woman. But now we know that it is going to come from the lineage of Abraham. So we have now begun to narrow it down a little bit more. Bear in mind, some of you may know that I have skipped several passages in Genesis. We don't have the time to go through absolutely everything. I'm just trying to weave this narrative together. So there's somebody else who was extremely surprising, who caught a glimpse of the Messiah. As the children of Israel had been led out of Egypt and they were passing through the wilderness, there was a king called Balak. And Balak saw these people and said, "Oh, this guy could be a problem for me in the future." And so he went to see a prophet. This prophet was not a Jew. This prophet was not from the line of Israel. He was not a child of Abraham. This was a prophet who was, I don't even know where he came from. But one thing was clear. He was a real prophet. He was somebody who God spoke to and who recognized the voice of God. So for people who think that God was exclusively just for the Jews at the time, not the case. That's another story. I have a lot of other stories. So we're looking at the person, of course, of Balaam. So Balaam is now being called to. Let me just hide this for a second. Balaam has been called. I'm gonna hide this for a second. Just pay attention. He's been called and he's been paid a stupendous amount of money to curse the Jews. And God says, "Don't you dare do it." I paraphrase. So he doesn't do it. And then he begins to utter blessings to these guys instead of curses. And while he's uttering these blessings, something amazing happens. Once again, the window is opened, the blinds are pulled, and he sees something. And Balaam says in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall arise out of Israel, and batter the brow of Moab, and destroy all the sons of tumult. So this is, I would really recommend you go and read Numbers chapter 27. It's almost weird how he's proclaiming all of these blessings, and out of nowhere, he speaks these amazing words that will echo through the ages, that I see him, but not now. So he's looking at these people as he's proclaiming his blessings. He knows that there is something in the loins of these people that is coming out at some point in the future. He knows that it is not now. He sees him. He saw Christ, but not now. It says, I behold him, but not near. He knows he's still far off, but these people that he's looking at, he knows that they carry something, a blessing that is far greater than any material possession. And the scepter that he talks about, everybody should know a scepter is a rod of authority. It is something that if you hold the scepter represents power, it represents authority. And so this scepter, this power and authority shall arise out of Israel. That's what he sees. So we know that it's coming out of Israel at this point. It's just confirmed. But then Israel has 12 tribes. Out of which tribe does it come from? And so this is where we now move to Judah. So Genesis 49 verse 10, it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. So once again, the window's open a little bit, we can peek into it. This scepter that was mentioned by Balaam, so is now showing itself later, in this chapter, so in this verse. So Shiloh, there are many different people who have got many different interpretations of Shiloh. Some people, I personally, I'm not going to say that I know what Shiloh is. I've been looking into it. I don't have a definite answer for that. But whatever that Shiloh is, when Shiloh comes, we can still look at the previous bit. The scepter, the authority, the rod of power and authority will not depart from Judah. So we know it's coming out of Judah. It says, not a lawgiver from between his feet. And to him shall be the obedience of the people. So we've narrowed it down. But Judah was a huge tribe. Judah was a massive tribe. Bear in mind, when the kingdom of Israel split into two due to the sin of Solomon, and his son inherited only half a kingdom, this half of a kingdom that he inherited only had two tribes. One tribe was Judah, which was by far the biggest one. So Judah was huge. So where from Judah is this coming from? Also, bear in mind that, just a little bit by the by, we know that the Messiah is not coming. Sorry, we know that the Messiah is not coming anymore. He has already come. We know that the Messiah, when he comes back, he is coming back in glory. The suffering Messiah is done. But we know that he's got to come from the line of Judah. It has to be proven that he's coming from the line of Judah. There is no way to prove today that you're from the tribe of Judah. No way at all. Back in those days, they had a census. They had records which were kept, and those records were kept in the temple. And every single person could go and look up those scrolls, and they could check to see what their genealogy was. And every generation would add to the genealogy, and therefore you had a complete record of every single person. You could trace your father, and you could trace your forefathers all the way back to one of the founders of the tribes. You see it throughout the Bible. The Bible was meticulous about listing out where people came from. You've got two accounts of the birth of Jesus, of the lineage of Jesus, one in Luke and one in Matthew. One of them goes via the line of Joseph, the other one goes via the line of Mary, and they meet up somewhere else, somewhere at the top, because they're all connected to David. They were meticulous about those records. They called Jesus the son of David. Bad Bartimaeus, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. The easiest way to have proven that Jesus was not the Messiah was to basically go and prove and say that he was not from the line of David. He was not from the tribe of Judah. It would have been the easiest way to dismiss him completely because they all knew where he was coming from. But in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. It was brought and pulled to the ground. Jesus said that before this generation passes, that this calamity would happen to them, as in the temple being destroyed, Israel would be destroyed. A generation is roughly 40 years. Jesus died around 33 AD. Therefore, 70 AD, roughly 40 years after his death, is where the temple was completely destroyed and pulled down to the ground. There are no records today. If anybody comes in and he is the Messiah, prove that you're from the line of David. It cannot be done. It cannot be done. I've jumped ahead a little bit there. So we now know that it's coming from the tribe of Judah. So let's keep going. Let's keep connecting these dots. So now we move to Jesse. We see in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. There shall come a rod. Notice that these words, scepters, rods, they are capitalized. Seeds, they're always capitalized because they're not just talking about something arbitrary. It's not talking about something you go and pick up from the ground and you lean on called a rod. It is talking about a person. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the light of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. So we know that it is coming from the line of Jesse. By the way, let's just trace the Bible story up until this point. You had Adam, then you had the descendants of Adam, and then eventually you have Abraham. And Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob then goes on to have his 12 sons. And one of his 12 sons is Judah. And then from Judah, we divert a little bit. We have the story of Tamar. We have the story of Ruth. And Ruth was David's grandmother. So you begin to see that all the stories of the Old Testament, all the stories that we hear about, it's just the family of Jesus. All of these stories, it's just stories of the family of Jesus. It is filtering through the ages to produce something amazing in the person of Christ. So we know it's coming from Jesse. Jesse had several sons. One of his sons was most likely, I don't want to use the wrong word here, was most likely an illegitimate child. And that person was David. Now we can guess that, we don't know for sure, right? What we do know for sure, 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 16. It says, and your house and your kingdom shall be established forever before you. Your throne shall be established forever. Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 5 to 6. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days, Judah will be saved and Israel will dwell safely. Now, this is the name by which he shall be called, the Lord our righteousness. So we know that he is coming from the line of David, not from any of the other children that were had by Jesse. And we know that he's going to come from the line of those kings. So we're still drawing this line. So now let's look at what the prophets had to say about this. Now, I'm not going to be exhaustive about this. Isaiah has way more to say about the Messiah than I can ever possibly cover. Well, I could possibly cover. It will just take a long time and it will eventually get very boring. But let's just focus in on the key bits. So, Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 to 7 says, for unto us, this is one that we are all very familiar with. Once a year, we hear it repeated over and over again, right? Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there will be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So, this lets us know that unto them a son will be given. The government will be upon his shoulder. So the government once again speaks of the authority that he has. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. We all know these things. But the increase of his government, so we know that David's line eventually came to an end, right? I mean, in terms of the actual kings of Israel, David's descendants, they sinned, they messed up so much. There was so much topsy-turvy, but there were some good kings, there were some bad kings, but there were mostly bad kings, with the odd one or two good kings popping up along the way. But it wasn't enough to redeem Israel at that point. And God had already made his mind up that the kings that Israel had or Judah had were now going to be completely taken into exile. So by the point where Jesus arrives on the scene, there hasn't been a king. People are still waiting for these kings, for the son of David as the king who would reclaim the throne of David, right? But the Bible says here that the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, so to establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. So we're not talking about a temporary man who will sit on a throne anymore. This king is going to come from the line of David. Is going to establish a throne with judgment and justice. And from that time forward and forever, that throne will stand. So what we're talking about here is not just another man who's going to come along and sit on that throne. Let's keep going. Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Now what does Emmanuel mean? God with us. It's actually funny because when this is referenced again in the New Testament, because it's written in Greek, they say his name will be called Emmanuel, which means God with us, because in the Greek they didn't know that Emmanuel, being Hebrew, meant God with us. But when Isaiah was written, everybody knew what that meant, right? So a little by the by. So this is where we are. The virgin shall conceive. I want to park here for a second because this is where we begin to get into the realms of that which we are very, very familiar with already. But I would like you to please continue to follow this thread as we go through it. It's important that we lay these foundations before we move forward. Now, there are some people who say that the virgin that's referred to here just simply means a maiden, just means a woman, right? How do we know that this was anything special? Now, first of all, you need to read everything in context. I said last week, when you have verses that you don't understand, you need to use the ABC method. A means above, read the stuff above it. B means below, read the stuff below it. And C means context. Find the other places which may not be above and below it that it fits into, and it suddenly begins to make a bit more sense. Now, if you read above and below that which we just read, which was Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, you will see what is going on. I'm not going to go into it. You'll see what's going on there. But here we go, where he says that the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall. So this is a sign that God himself is going to give. If a woman was going to have a son, what kind of a sign is that? I ask. It's not a sign, but the virgin shall conceive. It's never been heard of in human history that a woman who has never known a man, will give birth. This is a sign, and this is exactly what God is talking about when he says, I shall give you a sign. When he says the virgin shall conceive, and his name will be Emmanuel, God with us. Let's get back to the presentation. Like I said to you earlier, this is going to be very word heavy, very Bible verse heavy. So please stick with this. We'll get onto the other stuff later, but today's one is effectively a Bible study. We are going to walk through the Bible to connect these threads. So let's look at Micah chapter 5, verse 2. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah. So now we don't know where he's going to be born, right? You, Bethlehem, Ephrathah. I call it Ephrathah. I don't know how you pronounce that. Ephrathah. I don't know how you pronounce that H. Anyway, although you are little among the thousands of Judah, so we're now still in Judah, Yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth are from of old, from everlasting. So this ruler who's going forth is from of old. He's from everlasting. Think about that for a second. That doesn't mean that he's from sometime no, from everlasting means that he had no beginning. Okay. And he's saying to this town of Bethlehem that you are going to be the one, you're going to be the town where he's going to be born. Now, this was something which was known to everybody. Any Jew worth his salt, any scholar of Jewish scripture would have known 100% that Bethlehem was the place the Messiah was going to be born. I even suspect that some women may have gone to have their children in Bethlehem just so they can check to see if he's special as he grows up. Be like, you know what, you could be the Messiah. You were born in Bethlehem. I mean, I don't know if it happened. I find it funny to think that it could potentially have happened that way. But I mean, it takes a lot more than fulfilling being born in Bethlehem to fulfill all of these signs and all of these prophecies that had been given. Okay. In fact, when Herod was trying to destroy the Jews, so he was trying to destroy Jesus, he went and asked, "Where is this child going to be born?" And they told him very quickly, like, "It's Bethlehem." Duh. You know, it's Bethlehem. And that's also something which um I was thinking about the other day. Do you realize that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he had no contemporaries born in his year in Bethlehem? Like, there was a school in Bethlehem that was trying to take children in from the year that Jesus was born. There were no kids. And heck, they killed everybody that was 2 years and above, right? Which basically means that for 2 years, there would have been no new children in Bethlehem in that class. That's how devastating that thing would have been. But that's neither here nor there. I was just thinking about that. So we know that it's Bethlehem. Now in Malachi is a part of the Bible that everybody's familiar with because of those windows of heaven and those blessings and curses and will man rob God? But Malachi contains a lot more than those, right? So Malachi chapter 3 verse 1. Behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight. Behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament. And Malachi, I would suggest that you read through Malachi and just maybe skip the whole windows of heavens thing that you may have thought that you may have known before. Just read all of Malachi for what it is, and you will see that it is profound in the way in which it lays the foundation for Matthew. More than 600 years later, this wasn't going to be done in an instant. This was going to take time to marinate, but they've been talking about this for thousands of years at this point, that this guy was coming, this messenger was coming. He said that he will prepare the way before me. The Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. So the Lord will be brought into the temple. When Jesus was a baby, we know he was taken into the temple. When Jesus was older, 12 years old, we know that he was in the temple. We know that as a man, he was in the temple. I can only imagine when Jesus walked into the temple and he must have laughed. I mean, like, he was there when they built the whole thing. He was there when, anyway, but yeah, I mean, look where we are today. Where the temple used to be is now, presumably, so they say, the Dome of the Rock. Whether the Dome of the Rock is on the actual site of the old temple or not, the point remains that the old temple is not there anymore. There is nobody alive today who's going to fulfill this. It cannot happen. We know that Zechariah said that he will come and be taken to the temple. Zechariah was there at the time of the second temple. We know the first temple was destroyed. So the second temple, which was built after the exile of the Jews, is where he was going to be taken to. That second temple is gone. There's nothing there in Israel anymore. There's no Messiah that can fulfill this anymore. When you have people, there's a guy in Russia today, look him up. He's running around claiming he's Jesus. And I'm like, okay, were you born in Bethlehem? Are you the second coming of Christ? In which case, what are you doing? You know, the second coming is supposed to be majestic. The whole world will see him. You're hiding out in Russia, teaching a few weirdos in the desert. This is not Christ. Anyway, so he's coming. They say this is Malachi, 600 years before Matthew. Zechariah, it says, rejoice greatly. This is Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. We'll share these slides with you, so you don't need to be taking notes of them. Just please pay attention. Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the fowl of a donkey. So we know that he's going to, now we all know what happened when Jesus went into Jerusalem. We know that Jesus purposely went and got a donkey to ride on to specifically fulfill this prophecy. Now, I don't know if somebody can go and rent a donkey and ride into Jerusalem today and try to fulfill this. But it's very clear when you read this that this is talking about a time long before the modern era. There is no other Messiah coming. I'm going to keep going on about this. There is no other Messiah coming. In Isaiah chapter 42, verses 1 to 4, behold, my servant whom I uphold, my elect one in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. So we read last week about Jesus getting baptized and how the spirit descended like a dove upon him. And the Father said, this is my son in whom I delight. Right? So this, I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the Gentiles. He will not cry out, nor raise his voice, nor cause his voice to be heard in the streets. A bruised reed he shall not break, of smoking flax he shall not quench. He will bring forth justice for truth. He will not fail, nor be discouraged, till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands will wait for his law. So once again, I mean, like I said, Isaiah, there's going to be a lot of Isaiah in this, right? Isaiah, it's riddled, absolutely riddled. In fact, Isaiah 42, 52, 53, those are the key ones. Read those and look for the words, my servant. As, as my servant is mentioned, look at what my servant is supposed to do. And you'll see, once again, the S. By the way, I didn't go through and capitalize these. I literally copied and pasted them directly from the Bible.com site. But you will notice that my servant, the S once again is capitalized. The E, elect one, is capitalized. When you see Lord in the Bible and it's referring to, say, Abraham being a Lord, it's a small L. Where you see Lord, where it is capitalized, it's talking about God. When you see S in the Bible, as much as they could translate it in those days, you saw that the small s refers to a spirit just like us, or a spirit like a spirit. But where the spirit is capitalized, we're talking about the spirit of the living God. So when you see these capitalizations, pay attention to them, right? My servants, capital S, my elect one, capital S, in whom my soul delights. I'll put my spirit, capital S, upon him. So once again, we're talking about this Messiah. I'm gonna skip this one. Actually, no, I'm gonna read it because this is one that we all know and we all love. Therefore, this is Isaiah 52, verses 6 to 7. Therefore, my people shall know my name. Therefore, they shall know in that day that I am he who speaks. Behold, it is I. Then the part that we all know. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings and good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. So, what time is it? I think we've got enough time to quickly look through the book of Psalms. Now, so Psalms and the Proverbs have a lot to say. King David, let me just stop this for a second. So, King David, when he wrote the Psalms, and it wasn't just David who wrote Psalms, there were others who contributed to it too, but the majority of the body of Psalms is the work of King David. And when he wrote this, David, I don't want you to look at this as purely just somebody writing writing a song. I mean, I love hymns. I mean, God bless the authors and the writers of today's modern songs. I like them too. They're great to listen to on the train on the way to work. But when I want to worship, when I really want to worship, I look for a hymn. and look for those old school hymns, those ones that were written by somebody who absolutely had the Spirit of God. The kind of words that when you speak them, you cannot be speak. They're not love songs to a human being. You cannot substitute a human being for the words that are spoken in those songs. Those songs are beautiful. They speak to the spirit, and they tell you that the person who wrote this was either an amazing orator, no, that's someone who speaks. Anyway, an amazing writer, or he actually had the Spirit of God within him, or both. You know, when David wrote the Psalms, he went into a completely different place. Not all of the Psalms were written entirely from him. There were times when David wrote the Psalms and the Spirit of God took over. And when the Spirit of God took over, it opened his eyes to see certain things. And that's what we're going to end this one on as we quickly look at these final few verses from the from the Psalms. So this is Psalm 110 from verses 1, 2, and 4. And we know that this is one that Jesus himself quoted. The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies till I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion, rule in the midst of your enemies. The Lord has sworn and he will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. This was not David that was being written about. And we're talking about a priest which is coming according to the order of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek being this semi-shadowy figure which just comes out of nowhere in Genesis and to whom Abraham gives a tithe, right? That's Melchizedek. Now, he's not mentioned again until suddenly he pops up again in this Psalm 110, a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. He's not a priest that is coming according to the order of the Levites. He's breaking away from that. He's going to an origin that we are not aware of. We don't know where Melchizedek came from. We don't know where he went. But Jesus is of the order of Melchizedek, not of the order of the Levites. We know we're breaking that. So this is another reference to that Messiah. Proverbs chapter 30, verse 34. Who has ascended into heaven or descended? Who has gathered the wind in his fist? Who has bound the waters in a garment? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is what? His son's name, if you know. And it's interesting that the person who wrote this, if you read it by itself, it doesn't make sense. But like we said, now that we have got permission to go back into the Old Testament and read through some of these, you're like, ah, there it is. That's another reference to who? To Christ. And these threads are now being woven. So we have seen that this Messiah is going to be a king. We have seen he's going to reign. We have seen that he's going to reign forever, and his throne will be established forever. We have seen that he's going to come in the authority of God. We have seen that when he speaks, God himself would have spoken. We have seen that he's going to tear down strongholds and he will be for the nations. We've seen all these, but there's another element to this Messiah which was very abundantly clear, which is that the Messiah is going to be a suffering Messiah. He's going to be rejected, he will be hidden, and then he'll be received. And this rejected, hidden, received theme is throughout the Bible. If you just start with Jacob. Jacob was rejected. He had to run away from his family, and then he was eventually accepted again. So he was hidden for a while. So he went to go and live with his uncle Laban. He was hidden away for a while, and then he was then received back when he went to meet his brother Esau. So this pattern of rejected, hidden, received, it's you see it throughout the Old Testament. So you can pick almost anybody, right? So take a look at, say, so we've done Jacob. Let's go to Joseph. That's, Jacob's son. Joseph, once again, he was rejected by his brothers. He went off to Egypt, where he spent time in Potiphar's house and in prison, then eventually became the prime minister, before his brothers now came back to him, and once again he was received. So we see that pattern. We look at Moses. Moses was a prince of Egypt, but he then went in his own strength, tried to take what God had given to him, and he killed the Egyptian, and he was rejected by his people. Who made you a judge over us? Right? He ran off to Midian, where he was hidden. And then he came back to his people where he was once again received. You look at David. You can go on. David was rejected by his people. He had to go off and live in the wilderness. He was hidden for years as he ran away from Saul and hiding in the mountains and hiding in caves. And then eventually he was received. This pattern of rejected, hidden, received is scattered throughout the Bible. You see these prototypes and these stories of that you can begin to see the threads of Christ's life just already being written throughout the Gospels, throughout the Scriptures, without us necessarily seeing it, obviously. All right. So we now come to the suffering Messiah, and the suffering Messiah will come in the same pattern that has already been established. He too will be rejected, he too will be hidden, and he too will be once again received. So put this back up. So his suffering and crucifixion was predicted many years before he turned up. In fact, to a level of detail that's actually quite scary. So we look at Isaiah 53, verses 2 to 6. He shall grow up before him as a tender plant and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. So Jesus wasn't going to come along and be this is what the Jews were expected, this amazingly handsome, beautiful man who's going to be, just pure charisma, grabbing people all. No. Power and authority was what he came with. That not form or comeliness or beauty, right? He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace, for our peace, was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Who in history could ever claim that was written about him? Who has come or who is to come that can claim? It's obvious when you read this who they're talking about. If you were a Jew and you read the New Testament, you would see it's obvious. This is Jesus. There's nobody else it can be. There is no other Messiah. There's no one else coming. Look at Psalm 22 verses 7 to 8 as David was writing. This is David writing this. I don't know how many years before Christ David was. I'd say at least 2000 before Christ. And he says, all those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip. They shake their heads, saying, he trusted the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It has melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death, for dogs have surrounded me. The congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments amongst them, and for my clothing they cast lots. I said earlier that Jesus purposely got a donkey to ride into Jerusalem. And we know that there were other places where Jesus did things on purpose. He said that the scriptures may be fulfilled. So an argument could be made that Jesus was just a man who knew the prophecies and was going around just fulfilling them, right? But there are so many other places and so many other things that you cannot predict and you cannot simulate. You cannot try to fudge. His crucifixion is not one that he could have fudged. Neither is it one that anybody would willingly walk into. And not just his crucifixion, but the fact that they divided his garments among, they cast lots for his clothing. We know that this happened. It's It's like I said, it's almost scary how much detail there is that points to Christ in the Old Testament. Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they have pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. This is telling of the suffering and the crucifixion of this Messiah who is coming. Zechariah chapter 11, verses 12 to 14. It says, Then I said to them, If it is agreeable to you, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. So they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. This is talking about the wages for which Christ was, sorry, the wages for Judas, for his betrayal of Jesus. And Zechariah, all these years, hundreds and hundreds of years before Christ came, was already saying that they weighed out the wages. There was 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, Throw it to the potter, the princely sum, so the princely price that they set on me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord for the potter. Now, those of you who know. If you know, you know. If you don't, I'll tell you. When Judas realized what he had done, he went back and he took the 30 pieces of silver and he threw it at the Pharisees and said, I don't want it. I don't want it. And then he went out and he hung himself. And when he hung himself, then he bloated, he fell down, his insides burst out, it's all horrible stuff, right? But then the Pharisees were like, this is blood money. We can't put it in the temple. Hypocrites. We're like, you killed the guy, it's blood money. You paid the guy, So this is blood money, we can't use it. So they used it to buy the potter's field. And it was there that they would allow the criminals and other people to be buried, right? And you can see that, even if Jesus was to fulfill things on purpose, what human being could have fulfilled this? What human being could have orchestrated this? Only God could have orchestrated this. God is saying, my betrayal cost 30 pieces of silver. That was the price they set upon me. And they took those 30 pieces of silver into the house of the Lord for the potter. That being the potter's field. So I'm going to stop there for today. There's a little bit more which we're going to have to go through, which I have to carry next week. But once again, let me just quickly I'm just going to quickly run back to where we started off from. What we are doing here is we are playing this game, right? We're playing this game called Connect the Dots. This game where you've got a whole bunch of scriptures all over the place throughout the Old Testament, and one by one we are picking out the various passages, and we're building this thread and putting it together to form a picture. And by the end of it, that picture will be not the Mona Lisa; it will be Christ. But this picture will be very clearly and evidently Christ. He has been written about throughout the Old Testament. And what we'll do after we have gone through the prophecies of Christ through the Old Testament and throughout the ages is we'll go back and look at the places where Christ has done a lot more than just be prophesied, but where he actually set foot on the earth before the events of the New Testament. So I'm going to stop there for today. For those of you who are still with me, I know that was very, very heavy. There's a lot of Bible verses there. I even toyed with the idea of not putting it on the screen, but instead having a physical Bible and saying turn to this and turn to this with everybody, just to make sure that people were actually paying attention. But I decided to trust that you would be paying attention. So thank you for sticking with it. Do we have any questions at this point? I know that we're not yet finished. There's still a lot to go through, and there's a lot to digest. Before we get to I was going to say the good bits. The good bits, these are all good bits, but this is still laying the foundation for that which is to come. We have dealt with the Trinity and Christ's position within there. We have dealt with all the various different sects of, well, not all of them, but a number of the major sects of Christianity. And last week we looked into the denominations of that we would call Christians. Um, we have now gone into what Jesus had to say about himself and him being the Messiah, what the people who are around him thought of him. They all thought he was the Messiah. And then going back to the Old Testament, we started looking at what they were picking out of the Old Testament to prove that he was the Messiah. And all of these things pointing directly, each one of them draws a line. And each time you draw that line, the line points directly to Christ. And by the time we're done with this, you have just Christ there with a whole bunch of lines coming out of him. And there's nobody else that all these lines could be pointing to. So, does anybody have any questions? Okay, so I'll have a question.
Just
Oh.
just to play devil's advocate. The Jews, like you said, there's lots of points that Jesus is the Christ, is the Messiah. Do you know why the Jews are still refuting that and still waiting for it? I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Jesus gave us the answer: the hardness of their hearts. So there are a couple of things there, right? The Pharisees of the day, so by the way, sorry, thank you for that question. Who was that who asked the question?
Me, Vic.
Okay, hi Vic. Yeah, thank you for the question, Vic. The Jews, the answer is a little bit long. I'm going to try and do it as short as I can, and this is from I'm going to try and separate that which I know as a fact from that which I believe based on my own study and my own understanding of the facts. And this is the latter. This is my own understanding of the facts. There are some Jews who've got a very grand view of who they are. They believe that the Messiah is for them and them only. The Messiah is there to re-establish Israel and Israel only, and make Israel the center of the world. Make Israel the nation that will rule over the other nations of the world. They wanted a king like David. David was a warrior. David took Israel from being a minor kingdom to being the greatest kingdom that existed at the time. The greatest kingdom that existed at the time. And they believe that their Messiah, when he comes, will do exactly the same thing for them. Jesus did not do that for them. Jesus did not establish Israel the way they wanted it. In fact, they said to him, like, just tell us plainly, are you the Messiah or are you not the Messiah? Like, they said it several times, like, just tell us. Because all the signs were there that he was the Messiah, except the one thing that they were hoping for, which is the complete destruction of the Romans and the establishment of the throne of David again for the Jews. If you're ultra nationalistic as a Jew, you don't want a Messiah that's not going to do those things. So that's one reason why they didn't accept him as the Messiah. The second reason, Jesus said that he came to fulfill the law, not to destroy the law. Right? But by fulfilling the law, he got rid of a lot of the requirements of the law. If you're a Jew, you almost define yourself, if you're an Orthodox Jew, you almost define yourself by the following of those rules. Every single one of them. That's over 700 of them, right? No, 700, almost 700, 600 and whatever it was. But they define themselves by it. By Jesus coming along and opening the floodgates and it erodes the identity. They wanted somebody that would make you more Jewish, not less Jewish. If you wanted to become a Jew back in the day, if you wanted to follow Judaism back in the day, you had to become a Jew. Whereby what Jesus did was he established something that you didn't have to be Jewish for. It erodes and dilutes the message of the Jews. But Christ came for all nations. This is something which we'll talk about next week. I didn't get the time to go into it today. But Christ came for the whole world. It was not just for the Jews. There are some people today, Hebrew Israelites, for example. Unfortunately, I know many. They are interesting people. Yeah, very interesting people. And there's a lot that they have that I agree with. Heck, there's a lot that we would all agree with the Hebrew Israelites and their religion. But the one place, there's several places, but the one place that they go completely astray is that they believe that Jesus came By the way, Hebrew Israelites believe that, um, how do I put this? The Jews were black, all the prophets were black, Jesus was black, God is black, etc., etc., right? And they believe that they are actually the descendants of the original Jews. And what they believe is that Jesus is theirs. Jesus did not come for the nations or for anybody else. Jesus came specifically for the Jews, as in for them. So even for people who are professing to be Jews today, they are still claiming exclusivity. The difference is that the Hebrew Israelites claim Jesus is their own, whereby the Jews of today claim that Jesus is not theirs because he has not yet established them the way that they want. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Um, Let me see in the chat. If anybody else has a question, please put your hand up. You can go first. If not, I'm just going to go through the chat. Could you please elaborate a bit on genres? I think that's supposed to say Genesis. Genesis 3:15. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Okay, so Ni, thank you for that one. That's a difficult one. So there are several interpretations of what this means. I've given you the most widely accepted and most widely accepted interpretation, which is that we are talking here about the coming Messiah, right? But if you want to take a look at the other ones, the enmity between you and the woman, the you who is being referred to there is the serpent. The serpent being a representation of the devil. And what the devil brings to us is temptation. It brings us sin. It brings us destruction. It brings us death. These are all enemies of humanity. These are all things that destroy us. The devil came to steal, to kill, and to destroy. He didn't come to do anything good for us. And so that enmity was always going to be there. The devil always hated us, and we always hated what the devil brought to us. But even in hating the sin, we still accepted it. And there are lots of people who indulge in sin who hate the fact that they are indulging in that sin. You see it in alcoholics, or you see it in porn stars, or you see it in whatever it may be. That there are sins that people indulge in, but they hate the fact they do it. But it's got a hold on them; they can't break from it. Okay, and what this is saying is that Jesus, right? So the offspring of the enemy back in those days, and the offspring of man. So the sin that came from the sin was the offspring, man who was born. The two there will be enmity between them. Says that, however, he will crush your head. So when this Messiah comes, he will crush the head of sin, but you will strike his heel. It was sin. Christ came and his death destroyed sin. I mean, don't get me wrong, sin is still there, but through Christ, that's go to the other schools of ministry, right? But it was still the sin, the weight of that sin, that killed Jesus. So this cyclical relationship between sin and us is what that's going into. This cyclical relationship which went straight down the ages, but which eventually came to Jesus. And at the person of Jesus, it was broken. And the sin was now able to continue down a path for the people who did not accept Christ, but anybody who was in Christ is now free of that sin. He has crushed its head. But in crushing its head, it was still caused by his death. But then his resurrection then completely destroyed that sin. I hope that makes some sense. Okay. So it's Dahlia. Yeah, for the notes. Yeah, you'll be getting the notes. So Dahlia, sorry. I've been saying Dahlia for the last 2 and a bit years. It just rolls off the tongue, Dahlia. I'm sorry. But Dahlia, in response to the previous question, I have read that Isaiah 53 is not read in synagogues. Um, yeah, there are certain verses that I heard a pastor refer to them once as the torture chamber of the. I don't want to say the Jews because that makes it sound like it's all Jews. But actually say the Jews who don't have, sorry, the religious Jews who don't believe in Christ. There are certain verses or certain chapters in the Bible, and Isaiah 53 is one of those things where it's like if you're reading it, it's so obviously clear to people who you're talking about that the best thing to do is just to avoid it completely. Right? There. I've As you go through YouTube and just search the internet, you'll find stories of Jews, so many of them, who were not allowed to read the Bible. And then one day, as adults or even as children, they opened the Bible and began to read it, and they're like, "Oh my God, you are here, and you have already come, and you are Christ." So it just makes some people just want to avoid it completely. So yeah, fully agree with that. Um, any other questions from anybody? Okay. So next week, invite a friend, invite a colleague, invite people who you know generally attend the platform but are not here today. Let's invite them. Let's get into this a bit more. Next week, I want us to we'll be looking a little bit into some of the remaining prophecies. Especially, we've done the suffering Messiah. Next week, we're going to be looking at Christ for the nations, and then we're going to start to look at the parts in the Bible where Jesus shows up in person and why it is that we believe that it was him in certain places and why we don't believe it was him in certain places and some places where frankly we just don't know. So that should hopefully be something that's quite interesting to get into. And yeah, let's just before we round up, any your final chance to ask a question or make a comment. Okay, let's bring this to a close. So Father Lord, we thank you all the time that we have spent here looking into your word. We thank you because it is you who have watched over your word. It is you who has kept it and preserved it so that we can hold in our hands today the same words that you read when you walked the earth 2,000 years ago. We thank you, Father Lord, because those words are as true and as alive now as they were then. And we thank you because we have the benefits of your Holy Spirit to aid us in reading and in understanding. We pray that as we continue to go through your word, that we shall have an open mind, that we will not believe that we know it all already, but that all of us, including myself, will continue to learn, will continue to read, will continue to study, and will continue to find you, not just in the pages of the book, but in our hearts. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. So thank